Hello, I'm Craig Constantine. Welcome to Pod Talk, short conversations with podcast creators that are not just about podcasting, because I like to take the scenic route. My guest today is Danny Bauer. Welcome, Danny. How are you today?
Hey, Craig. This is an honor. Thanks for having me on the show. I'm doing great. So ready to make a ruckus with you.
Thank you. An honor. Says the guy who's got like a lot more podcast episodes out than I do. Speaking of which, the thing that I noticed immediately when I went to look at Better Leaders, Better Schools, was okay. First, I noticed 520 plus episodes, but the next thing I noticed was the length of the episodes are like, I'm going to say short. Like I saw some that were like 27 minutes. And so I looked at that and I went, oh, here's somebody who is either just happens to think the way I think or is making a thing that's right where I feel like the thing is best. I feel like there's magic in the
Hmm.
shorter form. And I think you'd agree. I'm not dissing long form. I'm just saying I love short form conversation. And I'm wondering, what do you feel is there magic in the format, or is it just that's what people are used to listening to? Because you haven't just done a few that way, you've done a lot that way and it's working. So
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what are your thoughts are around the length of the format? Come on, that's a place to start.
Sorry, as I cough into the microphone
No, it's
without
all
muting
good.
myself. So
It's all
uh,
good.
I don't like my guests that much. So we keep the conversation short, right? Like, and
I think
I
we'll end
can't wait
there.
to get
Yes.
off. You probably feel the same way right now.
No, we're
And
only 2 minutes in. Give me 5 more minutes.
you
But
know,
it does happen. But no, I know
yeah.
you're kidding.
The real answer, if you looked at the shows ages ago when I first launched September 2nd, 2015, right? And I call that Better Leaders, Better Schools Origin Day. I celebrate it, take the day off, have
Mm,
have a big fun because well, at the time I didn't know. But now, 8 years, almost 9 years in, like, oh, I've done a thing and it's helped people. So they were longer, much longer back in the day, and that's what I prefer because I want like you said, you take the scenic route. I'm a very curious fellow, got a
mm,
lot of questions, and when I started the show, I was scratching my own itch. I wanted to grow my own leadership skills, and then I think as podcasts became more and more of a thing, um, the tools we had access to also changed, and Apple podcast analytics came out. I don't know what year, and I don't care either. But I remember seeing, oh, people only listen to 40% of an hour and a half, or you know what I mean?
yes, yes. Suddenly we can
And
see what we hadn't ever thought we
yeah,
needed to know.
yeah. And so you were asking me this in the pre-chat, and I pulled up my analytics too. And just looking at the last maybe 10 shows, it goes from the lowest consumption of an episode, 59%, and the highest is 84, right? 59%
Mm,
of a 38-minute show. Um, oh, 84%. It says it's a 4-minute show, but that doesn't seem right. So something must have happened there. But the point is, people weren't along with me. The
mm,
super consumers, the super listeners, the super ruckus makers were, because that's what I call my audience, and we could talk about that if you want. Uh, but at the end of the day, it's a gift. It's in service to the listener, you know. And so, even though I would prefer to go deeper and longer, if people aren't really consuming that and growing from it and enjoying that, then what's the point? It's kind of, in some sense, a waste of my time.
mm,
So that's how I got to it. And one other big evolution from 2015 to 2024, I think this was 2017, so maybe about 2 years in, certainly by 2018, I'm really into coaching, getting myself coached and growing. And so I hired a podcast coach, first time ever. And he helped me think about the length of the show. He helped me think of the introduction. He talked about the importance of naming the audience. And so
mm.
those were some of the shifts that we made. And I used to have like these canned, I asked the same questions to every guest. That got really boring real quick. Like I hated it. It was terrible. So, oh God, what am I going to do? Oh, I'm just going to be Danny. Let me ask
Mm,
questions that I find interesting. And
Well,
the
there's
funny thing
magic
about
in
that,
that, right? Like
there
that
is.
idea of this is me. Like I actually think I try to hide as much as I can in the show. I mean, here's Craig
Oh,
talking about
you
hiding.
need to lean into yourself, Craig.
Well, I like to lean in, but Craig can lean in way too much. I like to
Okay.
control how much I appear, but
Sure, sure.
it's really important that I'm there. Like people want to hear a little anecdote and they want to hear
Yeah.
me talk about imposter syndrome or say that I have to control
Uh,
myself. And I think I don't know that everybody has gotten that message about you can't just be like I don't want to pick on Walter Cronkite, but you can't just be here's a question. Here's the next
yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Like that's a different kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what I was hearing in the episode I listened to, the most recent one, when I heard you with the guest, there was a lot of, I think you even literally said it, like, oh, that's interesting. There was clearly like this little wait, what moment where you clearly went, that's I want, and then the conversation went there. So I was clear
Right.
that it was not the further in we went, the less we were following some vision you had of what it was supposed to be when you said, would you like to come on my show? So I really think
Yeah.
that's an important point you make there about when I decided to just be Danny. It makes a difference.
Right. And that's the fun part of being, a guest on your show is like I get to be more of me. I have received feedback that I'm a great facilitator of a conversation or
Mhm.
interviewer. I ask good questions and listen and don't interrupt guests, all that kind of stuff. So, my role changes depending on if it's my show or on somebody's show. But where you can, I think your audience would definitely love to hear your perspective. So, yeah, it's been a blast, and I can't believe that I've almost been doing it. 2 more years, it'll be a decade. Like, whoa! Like, how did that happen?
How did that
Um,
happen? I know
but it
exactly
still
how that happened.
feels,
One step at a time, right?
yeah, still feels like it's new.
Mm,
Honestly, there's parts that I'm trying to figure out. So if there's anything that's irritating, it makes me want to like just close this show, be done, forever. Um, it's sometimes like just it's about finding the right kind of guest to talk to, right?
mm-hmm.
And another thing that's evolved, I didn't get this from a podcast coach. I got it from a different type of coach, but understanding really like what is the purpose of the show? What's my point of view? I've been really good about talking about ruckus makers forever. And I think we share the alt MBA experience.
Yeah, I
And
didn't go through MBA, but I went through a whole bunch of akimbo stuff. Yeah, I'm definitely. I
okay,
call
Kimbo
us.
stuff.
I call
Right.
us the akimbites.
Yeah, got
Fellow
it, got it.
akimbo
So
people.
Seth Godin, huge influence on me and many others. And he's always talking about make a ruckus. And I was just like, oh, that makes sense. Like that is what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to help fan that flame, in a different way and in the education space. But that's how I got the idea for ruckus makers.
Mm,
It's just like that fits so well. And plus being in education, he wrote a book about education too and how it should
right.
evolve and that kind of thing, and that was hugely influential, in my work. And so I've been trying to continue that. But anyways, so I used to talk about like being a ruckus maker, investing in your continuous growth, challenging the status quo, designing the future of school now. And that's still true, but I'm refining it down these days to the idea of just like, ruckus makers. I help ruckus makers do school different. So what's that
Mm,
all about? It's really about just shifting from the old and traditional ways of doing it to new and different future, right? Which often is a better solution. But thinking about those shifts, and then you could get into the nuances. There's like a million different types of shifts. But the biggest one that I play in is, helping leaders who feel burnt out, don't feel supported, they feel like they're isolated, and helping them actually be re-energized, thrilled to be a school leader
mm,
and ruckus maker, to feel supported, and ultimately to experience sustainable leadership. You know,
mm.
we won't make it a show about education, but the research shows like we're in trouble, and school administrators and teachers, they're like, get me the hell out of here, right? They're leaving quickly.
Yeah,
And
exactly the opposite
so,
of what we need. The people with the
yeah,
experience. We need, if there are
totally.
changes, make the changes, but we don't want to just have everybody jump off the ship.
Right. And that's why the show is so important in my voice and how we support ruckus makers, because what I've realized with the folks that we do support, the stories I hear about being re-energized and occupying a sustainable space, we're outliers compared to what the industry is facing.
Hmm.
So that makes me think, oh, if we could just find one more ruckus maker and then one more and one more after that,
They make two
we'll
more, right? Each
yeah,
one makes
yeah, we'll be in a good position. Yeah.
you. It's something that you said way back, stuck in my mind. You mentioned that when you were talking and working with a podcast coach, he encouraged you to name your audience.
Right.
Anybody who has done anything with Akimbo or Seth, will be familiar with the who's it for, what's it for.
Yeah.
Jokingly, we used to call it minimum viable podcast, minimum viable product. Like, be clear about what you're aiming for. And my thought when you said that was, I think in the opening of your show, you literally name your audience. In addition to just like when you first said the sentence, name your audience, in my head, I
Mm,
heard, Craig, be clear about who it's for. But I think you
mm.
actually also meant, yeah, and literally name the audience. Is that what you were saying about in your show? Like, you probably can do your show opening off the top of your head if you if you
I
wanted to.
pulled it up so I could do it now and we can
Does that make
unpack it.
sense what I'm asking?
Well, I think what you're asking is, uh, do I name them in the intro on purpose? Right?
Yeah.
Is that
You
is
do
that what
name
you're
them in the
asking?
intro. If you do name
I
them in
do.
the intro. I did hear that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I go,
Yeah.
thanks for hidden play, right? If you love exploring, this is the newest version, right? So as I've
Mm.
gotten clearer with my point of view and perspective, how do I frame, name, and claim what we're all about and make it clear to the audience member? People who've been
Cool.
listening since 2015 have been on that journey and they get it. But if you listen to the show for the first time, why am I listening, right? If I'm
Yeah.
in
So
education,
do
what do I
do
get?
the intro for me. Like, just take a
Yeah.
pause and then just do the intro so people can hear what I'm pointing
Mm,
at as this struck me when I heard your episode.
yeah. Thanks for hidden play. If you love exploring how to do school different so you can make a legendary impact on your campus, then you're in the right place. I'm Danny Bauer, and this is the Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast, the original Ruckus Maker podcast for visionary leaders, innovators, and rebels in education. Thanks to ruckus makers just like you, this podcast ranks in the top 0.5% of over 3 million worldwide shows. In today's conversation, I speak with Craig Constantine. We cover topics like, and then one, two, three, four,
Right.
five,
Well played.
right? So once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening, and we'll be right back after a quick message from our show sponsors.
Mm.
So it's kind of brainwashing in a very positive way, but like I want people to know this show's for
Yeah, I
ruckus
wouldn't say
makers.
brainwashing. I like the point of like,
Okay.
who's it for?
educating,
And
educating,
people
right?
like, what else does Seth always would say? People like us do things like this. And you're
Yeah, 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 yeah.
literally pointing at people like you do things like this.
Yeah.
I'm suddenly having this moment where I need to redesign the intros to my shows. But before I
Yeah,
go down
let's
that
do it.
path, I just think it's interesting to like this. My show goes all over the place. Like, some episodes
Mm,
are, way deep in
yep.
stories, some episodes. But in this case, I thought it was interesting to understand more about where that intro comes from and what pieces are in there. Cause I think that's a piece that I don't know that I've ever consciously identified that before. I'm sure I must have heard shows where people have done that, but I think that's a really good point.
It's probably somewhat rare, but I'm trying to really be great at this craft, and I think, based on the show performance where it ranks, I'm figuring it out. But intro number two is slightly different, and I'll just read you the first two lines again. Always starting with gratitude. Thanks for hidden play. Do you feel like a square peg trying to fit into the round hole of education? So either way, brainwashing,
Hmm.
educating people like us do things like this. I'm really just trying to talk about and describe the persona. Like, this is, yeah, like you said, this show is for ruckus makers, right?
Yeah.
And so rebels, innovators, blah blah blah, square pegs trying to fit in a round hole, and usually that kind of person feels alone. So it's invisible, but the parentheses and the subtext is, you're not alone. You found us. Welcome
Right.
home. Right? Yeah, it's cool.
There's a lot of challenge for independent podcasters about that being alone kind of thing.
Mm.
Um, and I'm wondering, I don't want to, I'm not trying to pry, but like, do you manage to outsource the parts that you really don't want to do?
I
Or
only
like,
record the show.
part-
What we're doing right now. That's all I
Mm,
do.
mm. So
I
do
think about
you,
questions, right?
right?
Um, here's another evolution of the show. Like I told you, I don't know if it was on the call or the pre-chat,
I think it was
but
before I
yeah,
know what you're
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
say.
So, but having canned questions to following my curiosity, to back in the day, let's hop on a call and just hit record. To This is actually something I did learn from the podcast coach, so shout out to him. Um, Hosting a 15 to maximum 30-minute, I really don't want to do 30 minutes, but if I have to, I will, intro call to hear your story, right?
Mm.
And develop my questions from there. And it's not so much for me, because as a host, I think I could get there anyways without the intro call. It's just to make sure my guest isn't a complete like loser and terrible for
I
podcasts.
was gonna say
It's-
had tech issues, but all right, we'll just call them losers.
no,
Yeah,
no, they
I know what you
suck.
mean.
They absolutely
Sometimes
suck
it
and
just
should never.
it doesn't resonate. Yeah,
That's You're very nice and generous. Like, let's be honest, some people should not be on a podcast. They can't tell stories, right? They're clearly just trying to sell some crap, or
yeah.
whatever. So once I started doing the intro call, I was able to sort, sift, and filter out who should
It's obvious,
be.
right? You're like,
Yeah,
whoa,
yeah.
whoa.
But here's the thing that I'll tell your audience, because we're all into podcasting here. Like, if you're going to have a duo, right, a team on a podcast, then they both better be on the intro call. Because
Mhm.
I started doing the intro calls. All right,
Ooh.
great, feeling so confident. And then I had this husband and wife, and the wife, man, she was great, so good, storyteller, engaging. The husband, just garbage, the worst.
A brick.
Sucked at stories. He didn't even look like he wanted to be there. Like, maybe she like forced him, he was a hostage or something. And not only that, this dude was like tapping crap on the desk the whole time, right?
Oh,
Just complete garbage. But back then, I didn't have the confidence to be like, yo, you
dude,
suck. And
knock it
we're
off.
done recording, right?
Yeah,
Unless
yeah.
you stop. So I went through with the show, but you need to go through stuff like that to figure out how you're going to handle it. So now I'm prepared for the next one. But I mean, I've made the rule. If it's a team, right? Two
You
people
gotta
write a
both be there.
book. Yeah. So you got to both be there.
It's so interesting. Like uh, maybe one out of four people that I know, maybe half at most, are just host on mic, and that they love to hear us all commiserate about dealing with guests. But even I think people who just do host on mic, they still have conversations. You're still dealing with people, and that whole thing of like sometimes you just don't click with someone. Um, and when you were talking about people who really want to sell, I was thinking I had a conversation with someone, not for this show, but for another show, who actually had written a book and was doing the book junket. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I just confused the crap out of him by like actually having read the book before he got on the call. And I was just like so happy to talk to him. We had the book's like tangential to a passion project that we shared. So I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. And I just like led us on this conversation. We almost forgot
Yeah.
to say the name of the book. It was like we got most of the way through and it was like, oh, by the way, we should mention. And as far as book junket podcasts go, it's as good as you can get because anybody still listening is emotionally invested. And
Yeah.
then I realized, oh yeah, they figured this out like 50 years ago. This is how late night television used to do it when you get the actor on and they don't want to do it, but you do the questions. And then at the end, he pitches this thing. So I think it's always interesting when you go to the trouble of like learning the lesson and then you realize you got to the right answer. Like that's a little bit of
Yeah.
vindication to like, yes, this is how it's supposed to be done.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that TV example, though, I don't know about you, but that's when I turned off late night. Right? I only wanted to, I wanted to see the top 10. Right? I wanted to see
Yeah.
the monologue in the beginning and the little bits that they were known for. Right?
Mm,
But once they got to the guest, it was like, oh, I don't care about your movie, and I don't want to
mm.
hear your stupid answers. So I'm out.
Yeah, it's too obvious. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think for me,
That's why it's later
I'm
in the show.
yeah, that's a good point. If it was better, they'd put it at the front.
Yeah.
Because you better bet Nielsen tracks how far people stick through, and they drop off as soon as he got to the sofa. Right? Okay, we'll get to the sofa later.
Yeah.
Sometimes like, what else is top of mind for you at the moment? What's in your head, rather than me leading the whole way?
Well, like I said, getting clear on this perspective and that kind of thing. So I had an epiphany yesterday, and one thing I'm trying to do in 2024 is be even more generous. And I have a service that helps school leaders be more effective, right? And sustainable leadership. Uh, and it costs a certain amount, and people invest, and they get results. They grow. But for some folks, there's a barrier of time, and then there's a barrier of finances. There's also the imposter syndrome, like, will this really work for me? But time and money usually are the biggest two barriers. And so something I thought about is, what if I create an application, get pretty clear about who I want to help, and just say, hey, listen, I know some of you would work with me, but you can't figure out the funding, and I'm not going to judge, the reason why. Your school district sucks and is cheap and doesn't get like why developing a leader would be valuable.
You don't make
Why
the
would
rules, but okay.
yeah.
Right.
And then personally, right, family wise, folks might be going through stuff. They might have a bunch of kids or credit cards and college debt, or who knows, right? Like, so whatever. Um, so I'm going to coach you for free, right? There is a catch, and the catch is, we're going to put our conversations coaching on the podcast, right? Because right now I've been doing conversations with people and just talking about leadership, education, how do we innovate, do school different. Something really interesting came through on the application. A bunch of people applied. I had to turn it off because there's too many. And one guy, I forget his name, he said, I never even thought about getting coaching until I listened to your podcast. And one of the questions I asked too, how long you been listening? And he's been listening maybe like 6 months. So he's newer to the show. But I thought, wow, how wild, that for this leader, like, the idea of coaching to grow skills wasn't even on his radar until he heard my message. So I had already put the application out, but that's an epiphany on the other side. And my goal was, like, obviously is to help these school leaders become more effective, and that will happen. I thought for the listeners who applied, didn't make the cut, or didn't even know, but they enjoy, the podcast format, they're going to have very similar questions. You know what I mean? Everybody's,
Right.
they're
Right.
facing, and Seth calls it sonder, right? Like the stuff that we go through,
Yeah.
everybody's going through something. And so if I'm able to, and I will be, create a result and help people get through some kind of obstacle through a coaching session and put it out for free, that's going to help a lot of people, especially with my show. It's downloaded
Right.
by a lot of people. And then most importantly, I'm growing the category. I'm not growing better leaders, better schools, or my private coaching, or the Ruckus Maker Mastermind, or me as a keynote. That'll happen as part of it. But the bigger, more generous idea is, how do we grow the category that you deserve high level coaching and mentorship? That leading in isolation is just a bonkers idea. Why do it that way if there's something else better available? And so that's going to open a lot of minds. And yeah, it's me coaching. Maybe I'm a good fit for some of the listeners. But the point is, there's going to be a whole bunch of more school leaders getting coached and mentored because of the show, because we did this style of show. And long story short, had my first coaching session yesterday. And Craig, it was so much fun because I love coaching. I'm like, oh, I will. I'll do this all the time. And then I thought, what if I just say no to every author who pitches like, what if
Significant
that
number.
becomes what if that no, what if I just only, like, coach people on the podcast, and or talk to current leaders I support and talk about how they've changed and how they've grown, you know? Um, I could do that all day. I could do that for the next 3 decades, 4 decades, easy. I would never get bored of that. And it'd be a lot of fun. So I know you had some questions about, like, is it boring? Is it like day number one? And with that kind of shift, I could literally do it infinitely until I died. Right.
And there's no
Dying with a
way.
podcast microphone in my hand. So
No, do not die on a podcast. Die somewhere nice and sunny.
yeah.
But
Oh,
there's
I'll be
no way
recording
that
on a beach.
Okay, all right. Die with the podcast mic in your hand while recording on a beach.
Yeah.
But there's obviously no way, and we wouldn't expect that you could have expected that, right? Like, so when I started on day one, the things that I thought were awesome and cool, now I'm like, yeah, that's the bread and butter, or maybe parts that I enjoyed became a slog. But
Yeah.
this idea that I don't want to say every year, but regularly, if you have the right
Mhm.
mindset, you will find a way to reimagine or to
Yeah.
redesign or
For
expand
sure.
what you're doing.
Innovate,
Um,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. Innovate.
Yeah. Um, Tell me a little bit more about how people can find you. We've mentioned the show a couple times, Better Leaders, Better Schools. It's easy to find. But tell me more about what people could do if they wanted to reach out to you for coaching. There are people who listen to the show who are in education. So I'm like, how do you get a hold of Danny?
Yeah. Yeah. The website, betterleadersbetterschools.com. Email Danny at betterleadersbetterschools.com. Give me a call, 312-788-7595. So those are three ways. They all work, and I'll respond to
Cool.
each.
Cool. I'll put it in the episode notes, of course. I think so. Also, what people can't see is gaping void, Hugh McLeod. As soon as your video came on, I'm like, oh, we're going to get along. On the background, on the wall behind Danny are framed squares of illustrations done
Yeah.
by Hugh. And what that made me think was, yeah, you don't have to tease me. I know I recognize them all. But what that made me think of was you're clearly, and I'm not asking you necessarily to describe it, but you're clearly working in a space that you have created to nourish yourself. Like, not just, yes, I have a roof and I'm safe from the elements, but you've gone further and you've clearly collected things that I can see. I'm assuming there are things that you can see. Have you always been that kind of person who, I call that grabbing the environment and manipulating things? Have you always been that way? Or is that something somebody had to show you, or you stumbled over as didn't realize this was a problem that you weren't setting things up?
Hmm. I think I've always been somewhat keen to this, but after reading B.J. Fogg's Tiny Habits, which personally I like better than James Clear's Atomic Habits, but clearly I'm in the minority there, and that's okay. Both books are really good, but I think BJ and actually another guy, Dr. Benjamin Hardy, I read a lot of his stuff. They just talk about the importance of environment, right? And if there's certain kind of results that you want to create, and you're happy with where you're at and want to expand, or you're disappointed with where the results have been and want to change, well, one of the first things to look at is how's your environment helping you,
Hmm.
because it's producing the result, the negative or the positive. So when I think about my space, I'm at home. I'm not in a recording studio. I don't have recording stuff on. This is a sort of an aha too. I do have a very good mic, a Shure MV7. I like that mic a lot, but I don't have the stuff that people put on their walls.
Yeah,
I've
the egg
recorded all
crates.
my yeah, I've recorded all my audiobooks here just in my office. Um, so it's kind of like bare bones in that sense, and I'm just like I just show up, right? In my view, if I was NPR, I'd be doing it differently. It'd be really produced, but I'm not NPR, and so anyways, but things that are important to me in terms of the environment, I want to be inspired and creative and curious and innovative every day and all this kind of stuff. And so I want to be excited to be here every day. And so, yeah, the entering the office, it's opposite. But as I walk in, the first thing I see is all my values on the wall, right?
Hmm.
And these are things that I teach, my clients, and there's things that I believe about effective leadership, and they're illustrated in a very fun way by a company called Gaping Void. They do great work, and so it's just super inspiring, right? But
Yeah.
it's just a part of me, part of the story, and part of something that people fall in love with.
Terrific. As I often say, well, as much as I hate to do it, I think that's probably a great place to stop. I love, so guest outreach is the heavy lifting that I love to do. And every once in a while I hit somebody like you who I go like, hey, would you like to? And it kind of felt like you didn't even finish reading the sentence before you hit yes. So I really
Yeah, and I was
appreciate
like, let's just
your
do it.
energy.
When do
Let's
we
just do it.
record? I don't need
Pre
questions. Like, just let's
all our
go.
discussion of pre-calls,
Yeah,
there was no pre-call. We just like jumped on the thing. So it was
yeah, yeah,
fun.
yeah.
So I really appreciate when I encounter people who know that they enjoy doing the thing and that they really want to just go play and do the thing, I really appreciate that. That's, I'm going to say it's super unique, but it's definitely rare. And it's nice to bump into people like you.
Well, let me riff on that for just a second before we
Sure.
close. Like, in the business podcasting or growing a business or being a classroom teacher in life, you're either a mercenary or you're a missionary, right? And mercenaries are going to fight. They're going to be scarcity minded. Craig has to lose for Danny to win, right? They're going to compete in the same area, which is called podcasting. Or you're a
Right.
missionary and you're generous, you're abundant, you do the work if you're getting paid or even for free, right? And that's what
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing with school leaders with the free coaching. It's because I'm a missionary. It's about advancing the idea, the category, what we're putting out and changing the world for the better versus something that's just for me. So yeah, it was an easy yes because this is what I love to do.
Well, thank you very much, Danny. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, same here, Craig. Thanks for the invite.